My ex-wife walked into my auto shop on a rainy Tuesday in March, asked me for a job, and I looked her in the eye and said, "I want a wife, not an employee." 6 years earlier, Sylvie Boughton left me. I'm Micah Cardwell. I own Cardwell Auto and Diesel on Aiken Street in Cutler Bend, Ohio. The best diagnostic tech in 3 counties, and the whole town knows I've been alone in that building since my father died in the parts room with his coffee still warm. Sylvie came back with rain in her hair and a folder under her arm. I thought she came back to beg, but when I opened that folder, it was my shop inside it. My numbers, my debt, my name on a building I was about to lose by Christmas. And at the bottom, in her handwriting, in pencil, was one sentence that took the floor out from under me. So I said the cruelest thing I've ever said to a human being. And here's what nobody knew. Standing in that office, not her, not my crew, not our 11-year-old daughter. I meant every word of it, just not the way it sounded. Why did my ex-wife really leave 6 years ago, and why did she let this whole town believe a lie about it? What was in that folder that she couldn't have known unless she'd been watching me from 4 hours away? And when a man says I want a wife, not an employee, is he pushing her out the door, or is he begging her to stay? Let me take you back to that Tuesday. The rain was coming down like it had a grudge. I remember that. I remember the sound of it hitting the metal roof of my shop, so loud you had to raise your voice to say anything. And so I didn't say anything, because I hadn't said much of anything to anybody in about 6 years. I had a Silverado up on the lift. It had been misfiring for a week and lying to me about why. Every scanner in the building said the number 4 coil was fine. My hands said the number 4 coil was a liar. That's the job. Machines lie, people lie. You listen anyway. And behind me, my apprentice, Presley Vaught, 22 years old, a box-end wrench tattooed on her forearm, calls everybody Chief, said, "Chief, front office, take a message, Chief." Something in her voice changed. "I really think you want to take this one." I wiped my hands on a rag that was more grease than rag. I walked out of the bay, and there she was, standing on the mat by the counter, dripping. "Sylvie, you want to know what 6 years does to a man? Here's what it does." Everything in my body went quiet. The way a shop goes quiet when the air compressor shuts off, and you suddenly hear how loud it's been the whole time, roaring in your bones, and you never even knew. Her hair was shorter. She'd stopped biting her nails. She was wearing a real coat, the kind that costs money, the kind nobody in Cutler Bend owns, and she was holding a manila folder against her chest, like a shield. "Hi, Micah," she said. "Sylvie, do you have 10 minutes? I had a truck on the lift, a Camry due out at 4, and a hole in my chest, the exact size and shape of the woman standing on my mat." "Yeah," I said. "I got 10 minutes. We went into the office. It smelled the way it has always smelled. Fig Newtons, brake cleaner, 40 years of paper nobody ever filed. She sat down in the chair her father used to sit in. "I need you to understand that. Wendell Boughton ran the only tow truck in this county for 30 years. He'd come in here, eat my dad's cookies, complain about his back, and go pull somebody out of a ditch at 2 in the morning for free. That chair was his chair. She sat in it like she didn't even notice. She put the folder on my desk and turned it around to face me. "I'm not going to waste your time," she said. "I got laid off in January. Kessler Auto Group got bought, and they gutted the whole back office. I was the controller for 9 dealerships. 9. I have a degree now, Micah. I moved back 3 weeks ago. I'm renting the apartment over the hardware store. I'm here to be near Tam, and I am asking you for a job." And I laughed. It came out of me before I could stop it, and it was not a nice laugh. It was the laugh of a man who has been holding a door shut with his shoulder for 6 years, and just felt it move. She didn't flinch. That was new. "Open the folder," she said. So I opened the folder, and the floor went out from under me. It was my shop in there. All of it. Not guesses. Not gossip. My labor rate, $84 an hour. In a county where the dealer 40 minutes north charges $150. My parts margin, which wasn't a margin so much as a rumor. My suppliers. My tax filings. Column after column of what people owed me, going back years, in her small, tight handwriting. She had built my entire life on paper from 4 hours away, and at the bottom of the last page, In pencil, she'd written this: Micah, you are the best diagnostic tech in 3 counties, and you are going to lose this building by Christmas. Not because you're bad at cars, because you're good at people. S. The rain hammered the roof. I sat there and looked at that pencil line for what felt like a year. And here's what you need to know about that moment, because I've had a long time to think about how to say it. I wasn't angry that she was right. I've been wrong about carburetors my whole life. Dutch tells me I'm wrong 4 times a week, and it doesn't sting. It was worse than that, because for 6 years I had built an entire man out of one single idea. The idea that Sylvie Boughton did not want to be here, that she got in a car and drove away from this town, and this shop, and me. Because it got hard. That story is what let me sleep. That story is the floor I stood on. And she was sitting in her father's chair, with a folder, trying, and 2 things stood up inside me at the exact same second. One of them was 19 years old. It was leaning on the fender of her daddy's white Falcon outside the Dairy Cream in July, absolutely paralyzed with love, and it was screaming, "Ask her to stay. Ask her right now. Ask her before she stands up." And the other one had been alone in this building for 6 years, and it said, "Don't you dare. She'll leave again. She'll leave again. She'll leave again." And what came out of my mouth, because I am a man who has never once in his life said the right thing at the moment it mattered. I want a wife, not an employee. The office went dead still. You could hear the rain. You could hear the clock. You could hear my own heart telling me what I had just done. She stood up, slow. She closed the folder and left it on my desk. She left it there, which somehow made it 100 times worse. And her jaw did a thing I remembered from 1,000 nights. "Okay," she said. "Sylvie. No, that's okay." She swallowed. That was clear. I appreciate clear. She got to the door. She stopped. She did not turn around. "For the record," she said, "I didn't come here for that. I came here because I'm good at this, and you need it. And Tam's school pictures are still on your wall. Which means she's still in this building 3 days a week. Which means this building matters." Her voice held. "Barely. That's all it was. That's not what I meant. It's what you said." The bell over the door rang, and she was gone into the rain. Presley was at the parts counter, pretending very hard to count a box of oil filters. She didn't look up. She just said, "Chief," respectfully, "what is wrong with you?" Here's what I meant. I meant, I cannot stand next to you for 8 hours a day and hand you a paycheck and say, "Morning, Sylvie," and pretend that's a life. I would rather have nothing than have that. I am not strong enough to have you near me, and not have you. That's what I meant. And what I said was a cruelty with a bow on it. That's who I am. That's the whole disease. Put me under a hood, and I can hear a wheel bearing going bad through a closed door at 40 miles an hour. Put me in front of the person I love, and ask me to say one true thing, and I will hand you a wound instead, because a wound is faster. Dutch Ullman has run the transmission bench in that shop since 1981. 68 years old. Hands like catcher's mitts. He has never once in my life given me advice I asked for. That night he came out to where I was standing in the bay door, watching the rain fall through the streetlight. He said, "Your dad would have hired her on the spot. My dad's dead." Yep. He wiped his hands, slow. Still would have. And he went home. I didn't sleep. I lay there until 2 in the morning, and then I got up and drove to the shop, because when I can't think, I put my hands on something. That's the only prayer I know. And what my hands found, in the dark, in the back bay, under a tarp that hadn't moved in 6 years, was the Falcon. 1967, Ford Falcon Futura. Wimbledon white. Wendell Boughton's car. Then Sylvie's car. Then the car we drove away from our own wedding in, with cans banging off the bumper and Dutch throwing birdseed at us like he meant to hurt somebody. It threw a rod 90 miles into our honeymoon, outside Maysville, Kentucky. We sat on a guardrail in our good clothes for 4 hours, waiting on a tow truck, and Sylvie laughed so hard she had to lie down in the weeds beside the road, half torn down, under a tarp, in my back bay, for 6 years. She never asked for it. I never offered. I sat in the driver's seat at 2:30 in the morning like a crazy person, holding a steering wheel that wasn't connected to anything, and I finally understood something that I think you already know. I hadn't been keeping the car. I'd been keeping the door open and lying about it. Even to myself. Especially to myself. So I got up. I went to the counter. I tore the yellow copy off a repair order. The customer's copy. The one you hand across the counter. And I turned it over and I wrote on the back of it. Because I can't say things. But I can write them. Sylvie. What I meant was I'm scared. 90 days. Full authority over the books. I'll do whatever you tell me. Please. MC. And then I drove to the hardware store at 3 in the morning and slid a repair order under my ex-wife's door and drove away like a coward. At 7:40 the next morning, the bell over my door rang. She walked in, put a laptop on my parts counter, didn't say hello. 90 days, she said. Full authority. And Micah, if I say a number, that's the number. You don't get a vote. Okay, say it back to me. You say a number, that's the number. Good. And she took off that expensive coat. And underneath it she was wearing her father's old flannel, the green one, Wendell's. I had to turn around and look at the wall for a second. Presley whispered, Chief, are you crying? There's brake cleaner in the air. Vought, go do the Camry. 2 weeks later she found the book. It's a green ledger. My father started it in 1994. It lives in the bottom drawer of that desk, and it has names in it, and dates, and dollar amounts, and not one single invoice anywhere. Because it isn't a list of what people owe me. It's a list of people I decided not to charge. She read it for 40 minutes without saying one word. Longest 40 minutes of my adult life. Micah. She looked up. Kathy Dowd owes you $1,900. Kathy's husband died. In 2019. It was a bad year. There are $61,000 in this book. She turned it around and slid it across the desk at me like a murder weapon. The Vanderveer boys owe you $4 grand. Ted Vanderveer just bought a bass boat. I saw it in his yard. It's teal. Ted has a teal bass boat, Micah. And here's the thing you have to understand about Cutler Bend. The plant closed in 2011. Everybody here has had a hard time. Everybody here knows everybody. And when Verna Slaughterbeck's Buick won't start, and she's 81 years old and lives on $900 a month, you do not charge Verna Slaughterbeck for a starter. You just don't. My father didn't. And I don't. And Sylvie knew that better than anybody alive. She grew up in the passenger seat of that tow truck. She was 11 years old, riding shotgun. The Christmas Eve her daddy pulled a family out of a ditch in the snow and waved off the money and drove home whistling. So she said something to me that I have thought about every single day since. I'm not asking you to stop, she said. I'm asking you to choose. I looked at her. Right now you're not being generous, Micah. You're being passive. Generous is when you decide. Passive is when you can't stand the conversation, so you eat it, and you go home, and you lie awake at 2 in the morning, and you tell yourself it's kindness. That landed somewhere a lot lower than my chest. Verna stays. She drew a line through Verna's name. Clean. No argument. That's a gift, and I'm putting it in a column called Gifts. And every December, you're going to look at that number, and you're going to feel good. Because you chose it. Then she picked up the phone. Ted Vanderveer, though. Ted's getting a phone call. From me. He'll be furious. He'll pay. She was already dialing. Also, I'm raising your labor rate to 115. The town will riot. The town will grumble for 4 weeks, and then keep coming. Because you're the only man in 3 counties who can hear a bearing go bad through a closed hood. That's not a favor they're doing you. She put the phone to her ear. That's a skill. And you have been apologizing for it for 6 years. I stood in that doorway and listened to my ex-wife be pleasant and completely immovable for 6 straight minutes. Ted paid on Friday. In cash. He wouldn't look at me. He shook Sylvie's hand at the counter and told her she'd always been a nice girl, and walked out. By the end of April, we had collected $22,000 and given away 11, on purpose, in a column, with my name on the decision. And for the first time since my father died sitting on a bucket in that parts room with his coffee still warm, I opened the mail without my stomach dropping through the floor. I watched her work. I have to be honest about that. I watched her the way you watch weather coming. She'd put a pencil in her hair and forget it was there, and go looking for it. She hummed off key when she was balancing something. Every day at 4 o'clock, she'd stand in that bay door with a cup of coffee and just look out at the road. And I never said one word. Not one. 90 days. She said a number. That was the number. And then one afternoon, Presley came and stood next to me while I watched my ex-wife stand in my doorway, and she said the thing that broke my whole world open. She said, "Chief, can I ask you something? Why'd she really leave?" And I opened my mouth to say it. She left because it got hard. The sentence I'd said in my head 10,000 times. The floor I'd been standing on for 6 years. And I couldn't, because standing right there, in that grease and that noise, I realized something that made my hands go cold. In 6 years, I had never asked her. Not once. I never asked the question, because I already had the answer, and the answer let me sleep. And I looked up, and there it was, right over the lift, where it's been my whole life, painted in my father's crooked, stubborn handwriting. The first rule he ever taught me, the rule every person in this town has read while they waited on an oil change. You don't guess, you test. I'd read that sign every day for 6 years, and I never once tested the only thing that mattered. 2 days later, I did something I hadn't done in 6 years. I pulled the tarp off the Falcon. Dust came up in a cloud through the shop lights, and Presley walked past, stopped dead, and said, "Chief, what is that?" "That's a Falcon. That's a ghost," she said, and I didn't answer her, because she was right. It sat there, Wimbledon white, under 6 years of dust, hood off, engine half torn down, one headlight staring at me like it had been waiting the whole time and was disappointed in how long it took. I didn't touch it. I just looked at it. And then my daughter came through the door with her backpack and her trumpet case, and everything changed. My daughter's name is Tamsin. She's 11. She plays the trumpet with no talent whatsoever and enormous confidence. She collects those little silica gel packets that say "do not eat," because she thinks they're being oppressed and somebody ought to stick up for them. Tam has lived with me since she was 5 years old. She stopped in the middle of my shop floor and dropped her backpack. "Dad, what is that?" And before I could answer, Sylvie came out of the office and saw it, and I watched my ex-wife's whole face come apart in about a second and a half, and then put itself back together, which is a Boughton family trick, and also a war crime. She said, very quietly, "That was your grandfather's." Tam looked at me, then at her, then at the car. "Grandpa Wendell's? He bought it in 1989, Sylvie said, for $400 and a chainsaw." "Dad, were you gonna fix it?" "I was." "When?" And I looked at Sylvie across that engine bay, and she looked back at me with absolutely no expression at all. "Now I guess," I said. So that's how it started. Tuesdays and Thursdays after close. Radio on. The three of us in the back bay. And I want to tell you what that was like. Because those Thursdays are in the top 3 happiest things that have ever happened to me. And I didn't even know it while it was happening. That's the cruelest part of a good year. You never know. Tam turning a wrench the wrong way and then the right way. Dutch wandering back with opinions nobody asked for. Presley showing up on her own time, with her own tools, claiming she wanted to learn old iron, which was a lie. She wanted to watch us. And Sylvie, 6 years gone, sitting on an upturned 5-gallon bucket in her father's green flannel with a distributor cap in her hands, saying, "Micah, that's the wrong gap and you know it." The smell of that back bay, old vinyl, gear oil, the cardboard smell of a fresh parts box, Tam eating a cherry popsicle over a valve cover, dripping. Sylvie showed our daughter how to gap a plug with a feeler gauge, and Tam did it wrong. And Sylvie said, "Do it again." And Tam did it again. And Sylvie said, "Do it again." And Tam did it a third time, and got it, and screamed like she'd won something. And Sylvie put her hand flat on the back of that kid's head for about 1 second. 1 second, and then took it away. And I saw 6 years in that 1 second. 6 years of a woman who had learned not to reach for too long. You want to know what it felt like, having her back in my building? It felt like the day you finally fix the thing you've been chasing for a week. When it goes quiet and it runs right, and you stand there with your hands still on the fender because you're afraid if you move, it'll come back. That was June. That was the best month of my life. And then a man named Owen Tice started taking my ex-wife to dinner. Owen is the large animal vet in this county. He's 41 years old. He's 6'4", and he has shoulders like a barn door, because he spends his life up to his elbow in cows. And in 2021, he drove 90 minutes at midnight, for free, to save a heifer for a family that couldn't pay him with anything but a pie. He ate the pie. He sat at their table at 2 in the morning, and ate the pie, and told them it was the best thing he'd had all year. I want to be extremely clear about this. Owen Tice is a good man. I have never in my life wanted somebody to be a jerk so badly. Twice a week, his truck was parked outside the hardware store at 7 o'clock. I know because I drove past. I'm not proud of it. I drove past a lot. And one Thursday she came to the shop straight from dinner, in a dress, and she worked on that Falcon in it, with a shop towel over her lap, and I very nearly welded my own hand to the floor pan. Presley said, "Chief, you gotta say something. 90 days. Chief." She set down her wrench. 90 days was up in May, and that stopped me cold, because it was true. It was the end of June. "She's still here," Presley said, and she picked up her toolbox and went home. The Falcon fired for the first time on a Thursday night at the end of June. It took 4 tries. 4. Crank, cough, nothing. Crank, cough, nothing. Sylvie's hands were shaking on the fender, and she was pretending they weren't. And on the 4th try, it caught. That engine came up out of 6 years of silence and settled into that lopey, gravelly idle. The sound Wendell Boughton's car made, pulling into her mother's driveway every night of her childhood. Tam screamed. Dutch put both fists in the air. Presley was jumping up and down like a kid, and Sylvie sat down hard on that bucket and put her hand over her mouth. And I looked at my ex-wife's face, and I understood exactly what she was hearing. She wasn't hearing a car, she was hearing her father. So we sat there. Bay doors up, June air coming in warm, letting it run. Everybody grinning like fools. Best night of the year. And then Tam, riding that high, feeling safe, feeling so happy she forgot to be careful, said the thing kids say when you finally give them enough ground to stand on. She said, "Mom, why did you leave?" Everything stopped. The Falcon was still running. That was the only sound in the building. "Tam," I started. "No." Sylvie's voice was low. "No, Micah. She's 11. She gets to ask." And she reached over into that engine bay and shut it off with her own hand. And the silence that came down after that engine died was the biggest thing I have ever heard in my life. She turned to me. "Micah," she said, "you should probably hear this too." And she told us. She started with her mother, Loretta Boughton, drank from the time Sylvie was 9 years old until her liver gave out. 11 people came to her funeral. 11. Sylvie counted them from the front row, and then she went home, and never said her mother's name out loud again, for 4 years. Then she told us about our year. The year my father died on that bucket in the parts room. The year I opened his books and found $138,000 of debt I didn't know existed. The year I started working 90 hours a week and coming home at 11 at night and falling asleep in my clothes on the couch without saying one word to my wife. And then she told us about February. There was a second baby. Tam didn't know that. I'd never told her. We lost him at 19 weeks. And on the Monday after, I went back to work. I want to tell you why, and there's no version where it sounds good. I went back because the shop was going under, and because I did not know how to be sad in front of another human being. Because if I stood still, it was going to catch me. So I didn't stand still. For 4 years, I didn't stand still. And Sylvie looked at me across that engine bay, and she said, "I asked you for help, twice." And I said, "You didn't." And she said, "Yes, I did. I asked you in March, in the kitchen, and I asked you in April, in the car, in the Kroger parking lot. And both times you said, 'I know, honey.' And then you went to work." Her voice never went up, not once. That's what killed me. You weren't lying to me, Micah. That's the thing I need you to understand. You weren't a liar and you weren't cruel. You just couldn't hear me. Your head was under a hood, and the hood was your entire life. And there wasn't any room in there for a woman saying, "I'm drowning in a kitchen at 7 in the morning. And then she told us the part I did not know. She started drinking. Quietly. The way her mother had. The way you can, in a house where nobody comes home until 11. 5 months. Nobody noticed. And she said that sentence so simply it took the top of my head off. Nobody noticed. Because nobody was there to notice. And then, one morning in September, she drove our daughter to kindergarten. and she pulled into the drop-off line at Cutler Bend Elementary, and she could not remember one single second of the drive. Not one. 4 miles. A state route, a railroad crossing, and a 5-year-old in the back seat, singing. She said she sat in that line with her hands still on the wheel, and the engine still running, and looked in the rearview mirror at Tam, and she saw her mother's eyes looking back at her. She left 11 days later, but not for Columbus, and not for a job. She drove herself to a treatment center in Zanesville, and she checked herself in, and she stayed 91 days. And then she stayed in Columbus, working nights at a call center, going to meetings in church basements with a styrofoam cup of bad coffee. And 4 years ago this August she got sober. And stayed sober. And got a degree while she did it. And in all that time she let this whole town believe she was a woman who ran off. Why? I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. Sylvie, why would you let them say that? Why would you let me say that? And she looked right at me. Because I was ashamed, she said. And because, Micah, look at me, look at me. Because I was absolutely certain that if you knew, you would take her. The words went into me like a screwdriver. And you'd have been right to, she said. Then she turned to our daughter. Tam was crying. Openly, the way kids do, no hands over the face, just standing there letting it happen. Sylvie was not crying. Sylvie was sitting on that bucket in her dead father's flannel, like a woman in front of a firing squad who has decided to keep her eyes open the entire time. Tamsin, listen to me. I did not leave because of you. I left because of me. Because I would rather you have a mother who went away and came back right, than a mother who stayed and got worse, and worse, and worse, until you were 11 years old, and counting how many people showed up to my funeral. Her voice finally broke. One crack. She kept going through it. I don't know if I chose right. I have thought about that morning every single day for 6 years. Every day, baby, but that's what it was. That's the whole truth. And now you have it, and you can do whatever you want with it. And I got up, and I walked out into the parking lot and stood in the dark. And I looked back through the open bay door, at that lit-up building, my father's building, and above the lift I could see it, 8 feet of crooked, stubborn handwriting. You don't guess. You test. 6 years. 6 years of a story I made up in my own head and never checked. 6 years of telling this town, and my daughter, and myself, that my wife left because it got hard. When what actually happened is that she asked me for help twice in a kitchen and a parking lot, and I handed her a paycheck and a house and a parking, I know honey, and went back to work. She didn't leave me because it got hard. She left because I was already gone. I'd left 4 years earlier. I just did it without moving out. And I stood out there in that parking lot for 10 minutes, and I could not think of one single word that wasn't going to come out wrong. So I didn't go back in. When I finally did, she was gone. Tam was in the office with Dutch, wrapped in his jacket, and Dutch looked at me the way he has looked at me exactly twice in my life. The other time was at my father's graveside. And he said, Micah, boy, go after her. And I didn't. I drove home. I want that on the record. At the single most important moment of my entire adult life, standing in my own shop with the woman I love, bleeding out in front of me. I went home. She didn't come in Friday. She didn't come in Monday. On Wednesday, an email arrived. Professional as a bank letter. Attached, the year-end projections. The new labor matrix. A written procedure for the gifts column, step by step, so I couldn't get it wrong. And her resignation. Effective immediately. 90 days having concluded. She noted, on May the 14th. The last line said this. You'll be fine now. You were always going to be fine. S. That month, Cardwell Auto and Diesel turned a profit for the first time since 2019. And I have never felt worse in my entire life. Presley wouldn't speak to me. Dutch spoke to me, but only about transmissions, which from Dutch is a form of assault. The Falcon sat in the back bay, finished, running, gleaming, with nowhere to go. And on the second Thursday a truck pulled into my lot. Owen Tice got out, all 6'4" of him, and I thought, well, all right, at least this'll be a feeling I understand. He walked up to me, didn't offer his hand. He said, she got a job offer. Kessler's opening a store in Dublin. They want her back as CFO. I didn't say anything. She's got till Friday to answer. Why are you telling me this? And Owen Tice looked past me, through the open bay door, at that white falcon sitting under the lights. And he said, because I took that woman to dinner 9 times. He turned and opened his truck door. And every single time, every one, she talked about a car. He got in. You built her a car, Micah. I bought her a nice steak. He shut the door, and looked at me through the open window. I know the difference. Don't you waste it. He started the engine. Because if you do, I'll go right back to buying steaks. And he pulled out of my lot. And I stood there in the middle of Aiken Street with 2 days left, and 40 years of not being able to say one true thing out loud. And I finally understood what I was going to have to do. The last Saturday in July, Cutler Bend closes Aiken Street. They've done it every summer of my life. 300 cars, bumper to bumper down the middle of the road. A beer tent, the fire department selling brats out of a trailer they've had since Reagan. And at the far end of the block, the high school band, murdering Born to Run, with everything they've got. I have been to every cruise-in since I was 4 years old. And in 38 years, I have never once entered a car. That Saturday, at 6 o'clock, I opened both bay doors of Cardwell Auto and Diesel, and I drove Wendell Boughton's 1967 Ford Falcon Futura out into the middle of Aiken Street. And I stopped it there, and I shut it off, and I got out and put the hood up. And half this town came over, because half this town remembers a tow truck coming through the snow at 2 in the morning. Half this town got pulled out of a ditch by that man, and never got a bill for it. Old boys who hadn't said Wendell's name in 10 years stood in front of that white car with their hands in their pockets, blinking, and one of them said, out loud, to nobody, well, that's Wendell's bird. And I stood there and let them look at it. Because I hadn't just brought a car, I'd brought a witness. She was at the beer tent. I saw her at about 7. She hadn't come for me. Let's be honest about that. She'd come because Tam wanted to see the cars. And Sylvie Boughton has never once in her life told that kid no. She was leaving Monday. Dublin. CFO. A number with a comma in it and a desk that doesn't smell like brake cleaner. She was standing there, holding a paper cup of lemonade, and Tam was pulling on her arm, and she was laughing at something, and my heart was doing a thing in my chest that I can only describe as a rod knocking. That sound an engine makes right before it lets go for good. That deep, wrong, get off the highway now sound. At 8 o'clock, B from the diner climbs up on the fire department's flatbed and does the raffle. She's done it for 20 years. It's the one moment of the night when everybody stops and faces the same direction. At 8 o'clock, I climbed up onto that flatbed, and I took the microphone out of Bea Mullenix's hand. I need you to understand what kind of man I am. I have not spoken in public since a book report in 1998, 7th grade, Where the Red Fern Grows. I got 2 sentences in, threw up in a trash can, and Mrs. Hollenbaugh let me finish it on paper. I have gone 30 years arranging my entire life, so I would never have to stand in front of people and say a thing out loud. My hands were shaking so bad I had to hold that microphone with both of them. 300 people, closed street, and B, God love her, looked at my face and just stepped back and let me have it. I said, most of you know me. Feedback shrieked. Somebody winced. Some of you owe me money. And they laughed. The whole street laughed. And that laugh bought me 4 seconds. And 4 seconds was all I had. I found her, past the trucks, past the beer tent, standing very, very still, with a lemonade in her hand. 6 years ago my father died in the parts room of my shop, I said. Sitting on a bucket, his coffee was still warm when I found him. And I took over that building, and I decided that the way to be a man about it was to not say anything, to anybody, about anything, ever. Nobody was laughing now. And that same year, my wife asked me for help. I heard my own voice come off the buildings. Twice. 300 people on a closed street and not one sound. And I heard her. Both times. And I said, I know, honey. And I went back to work. Because a transmission, I can fix. I could hear the band's cymbals ticking as somebody set them down. And when she left, I told this whole town a story about why. And I told myself that same story for 6 years, every single night, and it let me sleep. And I never, not one time, checked if it was true. I turned and pointed straight down Aiken Street, at my own building, at the yellow light coming out of the open bay door. My dad had a rule. It's painted on the wall over my lift, and every single one of you has read it while you sat there waiting on an oil change. And I said it. You don't guess. You test. I let that sit. I guessed. About the most important thing in my whole life, I guessed. For 6 years. Because testing it meant asking a question I was too scared to hear the answer to. Somebody's kid dropped a glass bottle. It rolled about 10 feet, and everybody let it roll. 4 months ago, I said, that same woman walked into my shop out of the rain and asked me for a job. She had a folder and every number in it was right. She saw my whole life from 4 hours away, and she was trying to save it. I had to stop for a second, and I looked her in the eye and said, I want a wife, not an employee. I heard 300 people take one breath together. I said it to hurt her, because she scared me. And it's the cruelest thing I have ever done to another human being. And then I said the part that had been sitting in my chest like a swallowed nail for 4 months. And here's what's killing me. My voice cracked. I let it. It was also true. I looked at her. I said the truest thing in my life, like a coward, in a way that made sure she'd never, ever believe it. The streetlights buzzed. Moths were hitting them. That's the detail I remember. That little tapping sound. So I'm going to say it right this time. Out loud. In front of everybody. So there's no taking it back. And so that if I ever go quiet on her again, there are 300 witnesses who can come to my shop and put me through a wall. And I said her name. Sylvie Boughton. She didn't move. I don't want an employee. I couldn't see very well by then. I want my wife. Somebody in the crowd made a small sound. I want the woman who got in a car 6 years ago and drove herself to Zanesville, alone, because she loved our daughter more than she loved being thought well of by every person standing on this street. And I watched this town turn its head, all at once, toward her, because they were hearing it for the first time. 6 years, they'd had a story about Sylvie Boughton. 6 years of she ran off. And I'd let them. I'd fed it. And in about 11 seconds, on a microphone, in front of everyone, I burned it to the ground. She didn't run off, I said. She was drowning. And she asked me twice. And I was under a hood. She saved her own life so she could come back and be somebody's mother. And this town said she was a woman who left. I heard my voice go somewhere I've never heard it go. This town was wrong. And I was the one who told you. Kathy Dowd put her hand over her mouth. I saw Ted Vanderveer look at the ground. I want the woman who made me call Ted Vanderveer. And Ted, from somewhere in that crowd, shouted, she made me pay. And it broke something. The whole street laughed and half of them were crying while they did it. And I laughed too, and that laugh got me the last 20 feet. I have been in love with you, I said, since the summer I was 17 years old, and you were leaning on that car's fender outside the Dairy Cream, and I have never once, not one single time in 21 years, been able to say it at the right moment. I looked at that white Falcon sitting in the middle of Aiken Street with its hood up and the chrome catching the streetlight, and every man in this county standing around it. I'm saying it late. It's 4 months late. It's 6 years late. It's 21 years late. My hands were still shaking. It's the best I've got. Please don't go to Dublin. And the street went silent. I want you to feel that silence. 4 seconds. It felt like the rest of my life. She wasn't moving. She was just standing there. And then my 11-year-old daughter, God bless her forever, cupped both hands around her mouth and screamed, at a volume that could strip paint off a fender, "Say yes, Mom." And Aiken Street detonated. 300 people. Horns. The fire truck hit its siren. Somebody's kid started ringing a cowbell. The band, with no direction from anybody, launched into Born to Run, again, badly. And Dutch Ullman, 68 years old, was standing on the hood of a Chevelle that did not belong to him. I climbed down off that flatbed. It took a while, because everybody had an opinion, and Bea took the microphone back and started saying things I did not hear one word of. I got through the crowd, and Sylvie was standing at the Falcon with her hand flat on the fender, her father's car. Her hand right where her hand always went. She said, "You said all that in front of Ted Vanderveer. Ted Vanderveer can hear whatever he wants." And she looked up at me. She wasn't crying yet. Boughtons don't. Until they do. Micah, I have to say something, and I need you to actually hear it. Not nod. Hear it. Okay. You have one weakness. Her chin went. It's that when it gets bad, you go quiet, and you disappear, and you're standing right in front of me, and you're not there. And I can survive almost anything. I have survived almost everything. But I cannot survive that. Not twice. I know. So if I do this, you don't get to go under the hood on me. Ever again. When it's bad, you come find me and you say the words out loud. Even if they're stupid. Especially if they're stupid, I said. Especially if they're stupid. And I said, I'll write them down first. If I have to. I'm better on paper. And that's what broke her. She made a sound that was a laugh and a sob at the exact same time. And she put her forehead down on my chest, on a shop shirt, with my name stitched on it, and got grease all over that good dress. You'd really put it in writing, she said into my shirt. Sylvie, I had my hand on the back of her head, and I did not take it away after 1 second. I have never been more serious in my life. I'll write you a repair order. I'll write you one every day until I'm dead. And my ex-wife looked up at me with mascara down her face in the middle of a closed street in front of the entire town of Cutler Bend, Ohio, and said, Yes, you idiot. And Aiken Street, which had not stopped watching for 1 single second, lost its mind all over again. We got married in the shop on the 3rd Saturday in September. Both bay doors up. 90 folding chairs borrowed from the Methodist Church, which we actually returned, which B says is a first. Dutch Ullman got ordained on the internet for $19 and cried through the entire ceremony, which he denies to this day, and will deny at his own funeral. Presley Vaught was my best man. Wore a suit, called everybody chief. Owen Tice came, brought a date, was gracious about it. Ate 4 brats. And Tamsin Cardwell, 11 years old, trumpet player, defender of the oppressed silica packet, walked her mother down the middle of my father's shop floor. Past the lift, under that crooked sign. The ring was in a coffee can on my workbench. The can says 8mm on it in marker. It's got about 200 loose bolts in it. That's where that ring had been for 6 years. I never sold it, I never wore it. I never took it out. I just used to put my hand down in that can sometimes, late, when the shop was empty and the compressor was off and it was too quiet, and find it by feel, and then put it back. Sylvie looked at it in my hand and looked at that can and said, You kept it in with the bolts? Best hiding place in the building, I said. Nobody ever looks in a can that's labeled correctly. She laughed so hard she had to hold on to my arm to stay standing, and Dutch had to stop the whole ceremony. And that is exactly how I would do it again. We drove away in the Falcon. Cans on the bumper. Dutch throwing birdseed like he meant to injure somebody. Tam in the back seat with her window down, hollering at the whole street. We made it all the way to Kentucky, and that engine did not miss a beat. Honestly, I was a little disappointed. Sylvie said we could always call a tow truck anyway, for old time's sake. In October, a man came out from Zanesville and took the old sign down. I'd argued about it for a week. She wanted to keep Cardwell Auto and Diesel, because it was my father's name and there was equity in it, and she had, as usual, a spreadsheet. I won exactly 1 argument that entire year. I won that one. The sign says, Cardwell and Cardwell, and underneath, small, Auto and Diesel, Est, 1917. We left the year wrong. My grandfather poured it into the wet concrete himself, and got it wrong in 1971. And it's still there by the drain. My dad spent 38 years telling people it was a typo. About half of them believed him. We kept it. Some mistakes you fix. Some mistakes you keep. Because they're the proof you were here. She stood out on Aiken Street the day they hung it. In her father's green flannel. With a pencil in her hair she'd already forgotten about. Arms crossed, looking up. That's a business name, she said. Micah, that's just a business proposal. No. It isn't. No, I said. It's the other thing. I put my arm around her. I'm just bad at the other thing. And she put her head on my shoulder. And we stood there in the middle of a closed-down 2-lane street in a town of 4,000 people, looking up at our name, twice, in letters 4 feet tall, where anybody who ever doubted her has to drive past it to get to the Kroger. I got it right eventually. 6 years too late. But eventually, you don't guess, you test. And here's the question I want to leave you with tonight. Not about my story, about yours. Somewhere in your life, right now, there is a person you have a story about. Why they left, why they stopped calling, why they went quiet. And you've been telling yourself that story for so long that it stopped being a guess and started being a fact. But you never asked them, did you? Because asking means you might find out the story you built your whole life on was wrong, and worse, that you were the reason. So let me ask you straight, who in your life have you been guessing about? And what are you afraid you'd find out if you finally tested it? Tell me in the comments. I read them, every single one. And if this story reached something in you tonight, if you know exactly whose name just went through your head, then do me one favor before you go. Hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. Because most people never turn the bell on. And then they wonder why the thing that could have changed everything never reached them in time. Don't let this be one more thing you find out too late. I'll see you in the next one.